What is going on, guys? We have more news about the Harry Potter HBO series, and this one is pretty interesting. So it has now been said that the director of the Harry Potter series, Mark Mylod, is going to make this series more realistic. When I first heard this, I was kind of like, realistic? This is a magical world with magical creatures, spells, magic wands, flying broomsticks, Quidditch. Like, unrealistic is not something that I would use to describe or even focus on with a Harry Potter series. So I was a little bit taken aback by this. But then I saw another thing for this announcement that says the upcoming Harry Potter series on HBO Max will minimize the use of CGI, relying instead on photochemical techniques and transforming natural elements into magic. And after I heard this, I was like, hell yeah. I actually really love this. So if you don't know anything about Mark Mylod, he is a very established director. Like, just going over his resume, I pulled up a few things. I changed my setup a little bit and now I have my microphone here, so I kind of like reach over, but I'll make do. So Mark Mylod directed episodes of Game of Thrones, Succession, Shameless, and also directed the movie The Menu, which actually stars Ralph Fiennes, who played Voldemort in the original series. Not to mention directing The Last of Us and actually having the highest rated episode of any episode in season 2. Also, this is the guy that shows will bring in for the early episodes or the pilot, as well as the finales, which are the most important episodes. So basically, he is that guy, which makes me very confident about him directing the first episodes of the Harry Potter series. And looking at this other post, it says that that's one of the reasons why he hired certain people who he had worked with on The Crown, who I assume means John Lithgow, who is playing Albus Dumbledore. But I was curious to see what other people said, and this one person said, realistic approach, this dude knows magic isn't real, right? But then right below that, somebody said, thank goodness, the Fantastic Beasts films were all magic and no plot, which is something that I never really thought about, and honestly, I don't know if I agree with that. I feel like the Fantastic Beasts films were a lot of plot. In fact, I feel like they were too much plot, which is one of the reasons why it didn't do well and why it was canceled, at least in my opinion. But yeah, a lot of other people said what I said in the beginning. He does understand that this story is about wizards, right? Another person said, uh-oh, add this to the list of things that are making me nervous about this production. I still say an animated series is the absolute best way to do this series justice. And honestly, I actually really agree with this. I think it would have been really cool to have an animated series, not only because they can make the characters literally as book accurate as possible, but also because it would have made it very different from the films, while the TV show is going to be live action just like the movies. Then I really liked this one comment that somebody said. Well, maybe not liked it, but I found it interesting. They said, this sounds more like 1, creative laziness, 2, trying to save money. And I absolutely disagree with that. I think that the way they are going to do this by minimizing CGI is actually way more work and is not at all lazy. In fact, I would argue that CGI is a bit lazy because it kind of skips over the sets, it skips over animatronics, it skips over all of these things that are incredibly hard to do and that in my opinion will always look better on camera than if they do a green screen with a lot of CGI. So getting back on track, no, I don't think that this is laziness or to save money. I think it's actually quite the opposite, and I think this is actually a really good thing. And another reason why I like this is because having practical effects rather than a green screen will actually help the actors give a better performance. And that's especially true for the child actors, most of whom have very little experience or some with none. Like if you just put them in front of a green screen, they won't be able to react the same way as if there's a giant troll in front of them, or if they're on set and they're going to add a CGI creature later. Again, the actors can't really know what it's doing, they can't see the facial expressions, but if it's practical with animatronics or other things similar to that, it's going to help them immensely. And by the way, for those that don't know what photochemical techniques are, not to get too technical, but if they do this, it gives you in-camera effects like double exposure and most of all, optical illusion. I actually did a project in film school similar to this, and I used lighting, smoke, mirrors, and other things to actually give a magical feel in my film that I did. It was actually one of my final projects in film school. So that makes me excited to see what they do with this. But some things that worry me about this are when it comes to, I guess, world building. How much CGI will you use for like the vast landscapes or certain sets, or certain creatures that might be too hard to have practical effects for, specifically for bigger creatures. And the films actually did a great job with this. The troll in the first movie was 100% CGI, but they had animatronics for Buckbeak, Fox, and even Aragog the Acromantula. So honestly, now that I think about it, this is nothing new and actually won't really make it stand out from the original movies, because they also had practical effects. They built the Great Hall, they built the Ministry of Magic, and that's another thing that I'm curious how they're going to do. Is the Great Hall going to look the same? Is it going to be changed? Is it going to be different? I feel like it kind of has to be different, otherwise you're doing the exact same thing that they did for the movies. It's also crazy to think about this. Like, we grew up with the Harry Potter movies in the early 2000s, but now this next generation, including my son who was just born, will be growing up with this Harry Potter HBO TV series. They might look at this the way we look at the original films. And another great example of this is that my generation, I was born in 1995, grew up with the Star Wars prequels. Meanwhile, my parents were introduced to Star Wars with the original trilogy. And I feel like my generation is much more biased toward the prequels because we grew up with that. Meanwhile, the older generations kind of bash it. So if we hate the show, the younger generations might be like, oh wow, this show is amazing, and the older generations are just wrong about it. But yeah, that's really all I have to say about this. I feel like a lot of people are making this look bad, but personally, I think this is actually a very good thing. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. That's all for today, so I will see you in the next video.